Darius, the low-range, low-mobility top laner, now somehow being played in bot lane, even in Challenger. This is I Am Sunlight, the current #1 Darius in the world, hitting Challenger with this off-meta pick in a new lane. But this is not normal Darius, this is Tank Darius, with an AFTERSHOCK RUNE page to help him in 2v2s, and a whole set of different level 1 plays to immediately fix any bad matchup. This pick is genius. This tank build maximizes the healing he gets from his Q, using it in this new lane on multiple enemies, for even more healing in every fight. Then becoming a tanky frontliner that AD carry simply cannot kill. But let's not forget, he is still Darius, so even as a tank he still has his bleed damage and executes, making him a hidden threat in every fight. This guy saw that ganking bot lane was the meta, and simply broke it with one pick, so I interviewed him to find out how it works. But first, I have a crazy sponsor for you this week. Are you struggling to lead your teammates to victory in Ranked? Well, why not take a break and lead your clan to victory instead in Clash of Clans? In this free mobile game, you can become the chief of your own village, and explore the fantasy world as you build, upgrade, and defend your village. Clash of Clans has all the competitive and team building goodness of League of Legends, but now with 80% less salt. Train troops, earn rewards, and unlock new content as you grow. Attack other players' villages to earn rewards, while also setting up your own defenses, and be creative with countless combinations of spells, troops, and heroes. And if you're a professional gamer like me, you'll want to test your skills competing with the best of the best from around the globe in Legend League. Yes, their version of the leaderboard is called Legend League, but in this mode, you are the difference between winning and losing. All the fun of unique strategies and outplaying enemies without the 4 monkeys on your team. Download Clash of Clans for free right now from the link in the description, or scan the QR code to give it a try today. Back to Darius and our player Sunlight. His story starts in Season 8 as quite a well-known Garen player. At the time he was around Diamond, and had just arrived at university, wanting to join their A team. The tryout started badly as he was a Garen main and no one really wanted him on their team, so he proceeded to join the B team. Playing a grudge match against each other, our Garen completely 1v9 stomped the game, so at the end they let him onto the A team. This led to Season 9 with his team being flown out to Los Angeles for university playoffs. He became one, if not the first top laner to pick Garen on stage. Season 11 was his first time hitting Challenger, still playing Garen, 1500 LP, a crazy achievement. However, his story with Darius began in Season 13. At this point, Garen's builds had really been nerfed, and the meta didn't fit him, so Sunlight wanted a change. The first thing he noticed was just how important bot lane was, and so he decided to take it into his own hands. He wasn't experienced at all on Darius, having played it a little in the past, but he did have a theory. He thought bot lane was the most important lane, however all of the meta picks were super volatile, and thus the lane exploded every game. Darius was the opposite of this. His job was to neutralize the lane, stop anyone from snowballing, and at the same time have a huge amount of pressure for dragon fights, as well as great gank setup with his E pull. And clearly our player was right about this, as this season, other than a few auto-filled games, he hit Challenger with Darius AD carry. The most important part of the game as Darius bot lane is level 1. Our player has 3 different strategies he can use to get an advantage in this ranged lane. His main goal is to ruin the enemy's laning phase. So his first strategy, Plan A, run down toward this bush and spot any enemies going for a level 1 play. He then bases buying Sweeper and comes right back, walking either into this lane bush or try bush to go for a level 1 cheese. If enemies face check him, he can start W and instantly force them to flash away or die. This is a great adaptation of a common top lane play, taking it to bot lane where enemies won't have experienced it before. For Plan B, he starts with his E, the pull. Darius again is looking for a bush play, but with the E start he can catch enemies at a longer range. He does this against lanes that have low early damage and they must not have lethal tempo. This is so Darius can guarantee he will win the fight over time with his bleed stacks, and enemies don't have the rune to ramp up their damage and turn the fight around. The goal of this play is to force the enemy flashes to make his lane easier, and then since he started his E, he plays the lane slow, letting the wave push into him, which also puts enemies into a position where they can be flashed onto. Taking his W, he goes in, hooking them again, and easily chasing them with the W slow. Plan C is his default strat for every other game where he thinks a level 1 fight is too risky. In this version, he takes his Q, using it on all of the 6 minions. This creates an insanely fast push that pretty much no AD carry can match, as your Q deals about 120 damage to all 6 minions. From there, the wave pushes into the enemy's tower, and this will end up with it bouncing back towards Darius on wave 3 or 4, which leaves enemies vulnerable to a gank. The reason for all of these strategies is to make sure Darius can lane against against these high-range champions. When he plays like this, hard lanes get a lot easier, because if you get the enemy's flash, or take most of the AD carry's health away, they're not going to be able to play the lane normally, and so Darius isn't punished for being a melee champion. Depending on how well these cheese strategies have worked out, you can choose to fight at level 3 when you have all your skills, ideally with the wave near your tower, ghosting to hook and chase down an enemy, or alternatively you can wait for a jungle gank, with Darius flashing for a double E pull, giving a 40% slow, into a 90% slow on his W, to try and start the game off by getting his jungler fed. Something very rare this Darius does is take AFTERSHOCK. The rune itself is becoming quite unpopular, but for this pick it's vital. You can see the effectiveness here when the enemy support engages. Immediately Darius uses E to proc the AFTERSHOCK, ensuring he cannot be bursted. This pretty much forces the enemies to go in on his support, who can just run away while Darius gets his stacks on the engager. The huge advantage of playing Darius in bot lane instead of top is that you have a support to set up plays for you, and this just makes it easier to get on top of the enemy. The other huge thing is his Q, now being able to hit multiple enemies for extra healing, which makes him even harder to kill in fights. The ideal situation for any Darius player is to be in an early fight, using Q on multiple people to stay alive, stacking up your passive and then demolish the fight. And this is even more likely to happen in bot lane. Right away he starts buying tank components, building towards either Jack Show or Iceborne Gauntlet. Even just with one tank item, he can immediately outpace the enemy AD carry's build. With just one item against one item, he's too hard to kill, but he can still use his passive stacks on the squishy enemy, and use his high base damage to get kills. You can really see how Darius has completely countered bot lane when he can't be killed, but he still has the damage to kill enemies. According to our player, this champion also completely counters the meta. Let's look at the OP champions on the patch he hit Challenger. Especially in the jungle, these were champions like Maokai, Zac, Elise, Hecarim, and even Vi was pretty good. This is because all of them can immediately one-shot a traditional AD carry, or at least lock them down for long enough for their teammates to kill them. However, Darius AD carry ruined this pattern, especially with a more tanky build. It made it impossible for anyone to one-shot him, and this completely changes the course of the game. If enemies play the same they usually do, the same plays that would have got them a kill against a meta pick now leave them dead. Even though he's an AD carry, he's not really an AD carry. This build is practically tank Darius, just in bot lane. Instead of being a carry, he's a frontline brawler, and the thing he excels at is punishing enemies for bad engages, or poor team fighting. So this is exactly what he does next. In mid-game he wants to 5v5. Anywhere is fine, especially around objectives. In a 5v5 fight, of course you're still Darius, so he still has the problems of low mobility, and thus cannot really surprise people without flash ghosting onto them. Smart positioning and looking for flanking plays can instantly win you fights like this one. If you can get in range of squishy enemies, you're probably going to win that fight. But the special thing about this Darius is that he isn't really a target for enemies. He doesn't really look very threatening with this build, and at the start of the fight he isn't, and so it kind of makes sense for enemies to prioritize his full damage teammates instead of the tanky frontliner. But as the fight goes on, if he's left unattended, he can also find ways to carry the fight himself, using his passive stacks and ult. Unlike our Gale Force Darius player who would assassinate carries, this more tanky build starts fights by building up stacks on the enemy frontline to get his passive, and then transfer it to the other enemies after. One big problem with any melee bot laner is that your siege power is never good, and this means that Rift Herald is a way more important objective when you have Darius AD carry on your team. Whether you're ahead or especially if you're behind, it's the only real way you'll be getting gold from towers, and so without it you're probably going to miss out on thousands of gold just sitting there in tier 1 and tier 2 towers. Darius now adds Black Cleaver to his build for the movement speed and the armor pen, but other than that he's building pure tank. Due to this build he's still very immobile, so his ghost and flash are vital for every engage. They really complete the champion, so our player never takes a big fight without at least one of them, preferably both. And this is easier than it sounds, as he buys cooldown reduction boots for the lower summoner cooldowns, also having Nimbus Cloak to make sure whenever he uses a summoner, it will get him to his enemies. The number one tip our challenger Darius wants to emphasize is how slowly he plays Darius. Most players are so excited when they finally get in range of someone, they combo immediately. Our player is much more patient. He autos, then uses his W slow, and then he waits for the enemy to react. They are forced to do something if they want to escape, and Darius doesn't have to do anything right away, depending on what the enemy ends up doing. If they stay close range, you can pull them into a Q, or if they flash away, he flashes to follow them, pulling them back to finish them off. To rate this pick, we have to talk about the counter, Caitlyn, the pick he banned every single game of his climb. Long range, high DPS DPS AD carries are the hardest matchup, and so cheesing enemies from bushes as much as possible is his main solution. If enemies have to use their flashes and can never take an even fight, then these hard matchups become a lot different. Roaming support can also beat it, as Darius's goal is to neutralize the lane, so if the enemy has a Twitch support for example, Darius can't stop him from roaming. Overall, I think this pick really fits the meta, stopping bot lane from becoming a fiesta, where one team wins the lane and immediately snowballs around the map. However, I don't think this pick is quite as good as the other melee bot laners, due to its difficulty, requiring these early cheese plays to make it work. If you just go into lane playing evenly, you're probably going to fall behind, and you can still lose the game for your team. That's why these strategies are so important and impressive that they work. Before we get to the build, I think the runes are probably more important, having 3 different pages. First we have the AFTERSHOCK page, the full tank page that really surprises enemies, and lets you win fights that normal Darius couldn't. The logic of this page is the longer the fight, the more passive stacks you can get off, and this leads to more damage, also being great if you're the only tank on your solo queue team. But our Darius does have Gathering Storm to make sure he still scales into a damage threat. He always takes attack speed, adaptive, and health in his runes, as the health rune gives him a bigger heal on his Q. This other page is an option to help against high poke lanes, as well as to improve your sieging power with Demolish. And finally, this page is for lanes where you don't think you're going to be poked, but you do think you're going to be fighting a lot. His build starts with Doran Shield every game into Ionian Boots every game for the Summoner spell cooldown reduction, first item Iceborne against heavy AD teams, or Jack Show against mixed damage, then buying Black Cleaver, Gargoyle Stoneplate, Force of Nature, and Sterax to finish off the build. His skill order completely depends on the play that you want to make at level 1, starting E against low DPS picks to look for free summoners, W if you want to cheese enemies inside a bush, or Q start in any other lane to fast push the wave, maxing Q first but E second for the extra armor pen it gives. Sunlight has a Twitch where he's now playing random builds in high elo, and thanks again to Clash of Clans for sponsoring this video. Link to both of them are in the description, and as always, thank you so much for watching.